for us today is, what standards or rules do you use to measure your life? Do you ever stop to compare yourself to others, to see how you stack up? In our verses in Amos this week, we're on week 4 of Amos, and we'll finish up next week. He has received 4 visions from the Lord. And we're really only going to look at one of them. The first vision was a plague of grasshoppers, and Amos prays to the Lord to relent, and the Lord does relent and doesn't send the grasshoppers. The second one is a vision of fire consuming the nation, and again, Amos prays, and the Lord relents. And the third one is a vision of a plumb line. How many of you know what a plumb line is? There's a few of you who don't, so I brought you one to show you. This is a plumb line. It is used, the weight on the bottom is called a plumb bob. Not Bob Hedberg, just plumb bob. Bob's leaving this week. Be sure and tell him goodbye. He's moving to Santa Fe. Anyway, this is called a plumb bob or a plummet. The earliest ones were made out of lead. And so the word is actually from the Latin word plumum, which meant lead. And it's attached to a string, and it's a heavy weight. And so it finds the center of gravity, and it's used to measure the vertical. When you're constructing a building, it's used to make sure your walls are vertical. It's been around as long as the days of ancient Egypt. The people of Egypt use this. If you've ever traveled in Europe or Italy, anywhere where you see some great cathedrals or great buildings, a lot of times in the middle or the center of that building, you will see some kind of bronze or brass star or something in the floor that has been put there in the middle of the center of the floor. And that was their focal point. They would attach a giant plumb line of some kind and center it there on the brass marking on the floor. And the walls of the cathedral and the building, whatever building it was, would go up around to make sure they were getting them straight and true. Even our early skyscrapers were built like that. There were giant-sized plumb bobs to, did you all get to see it back here? To measure that they were true, that they were square, that they were vertical. And the Lord in this vision is showing Amos a plumb line. And he says, I am measuring Israel by this. And no matter what Amos says, this is going to happen. And he has found the people of Israel wanting, that they are not true to the Lord. They are not true to his standards. My dad was a painting contractor, and he also did wallpapering. And the very first thing he would do would get out his plumb line, because with wallpaper, it's really not good to start in the corner, because many times the corner of the room will be off. And especially if you're doing a stripe or something with a pattern, if you get off just a little bit as you continue to put the strips on, it very quickly becomes apparent that it's not running true. So you have to start away from the corner with a vertical line to know that it's true and it's supposed to be like that. So my question again is, what do you measure your life with? How do you look at yourself in comparison to others, or what do you use? I know as a child, as at a very young age, I learned the golden rule. How many of you learned that as a child? Probably we all did. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's fascinating to read about the history of the golden rule. It too goes back thousands of years. It's found in almost every major religion, almost every culture. You saw the video of the children where they were speaking in their own language, some form or another of the golden rule. What's very different about the golden rule as Jesus speaks it, is that it is in a positive tense and not negative. In many of other religions, in the majority and most all other religions, it comes in the negative form, or what we call the silver rule. Do not treat others as you would not want to be treated. It's passive. Don't treat others as you would want to not be treated. But Jesus turns it completely around and says, do to others as you would have them do to you. Do you see the difference? It's a positive. It's a rule of action. It's not enough just to set back. The one little Asian boy said, I don't hit myself, so I don't hit others. You see, it's a passive view in many other religions and many other cultures. But Jesus calls us to action, to do to others what you would want them to do to you. Well, let's go back to Amos for a minute. What were the people of Israel doing? What were they up to? What was the standards that they were following? He is addressing again how they are treating the poor. And we've talked about that in past weeks. We talked about how Amos really has preached on every section of their life. He's talked about how they treat the poor. He's talked about their worship. You remember the message about worship, how he was just fed up with their harps and with all of their free will offerings and all of the things that they thought they were doing properly. And he said, I hate that, I despise that. And then he talked about the way the women especially, he addressed particularly the women, how they often felt that it was the men who were the people of power and who were oppressing the needy. And yet he said, no, it's you ladies too. He talked about how worship for them was self-satisfaction and all of those things. Today he's going to talk about their everyday life, their business practices. How many of you are still employed? This is more of a retirement group in here, I think. Well, it's about half and half. He accuses the business people simply trying to get rid of the poor. Simply trying to get rid of them by starving them out, by cheating them. He talks about their greed. He talks about the shops that, yes, they close their shops on the Sabbath. Yes, they close them on festival days. But all the time they're closed, they're dreaming up and scheming and manipulating ways to make more money the minute their shops open. When I read about this, I thought about Black Friday in our culture. And don't get me wrong, I love to shop, I'm a shopper, but Black Friday has only, in the last few years, encroached even more onto our day of Thanksgiving, our day of blessing. So it used to be, when I was a child, it was 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe even 8 before the stores opened. And then eventually it got to 5 a.m. I had a church in Illinois, Judson Baptist Church, in Joliet, that their big mission event of the year was on Black Friday. And they had ordered from somewhere, you can actually get backpacks that are thermoses, and these were huge backpacks, and they would fill them with coffee and with hot chocolate, and they had little hoses, little siphon hoses, and they would go out at 5 a.m. on Black Friday and go up and down the lines of stores like Best Buy or Walmart or wherever it was, and give people free coffee and free hot chocolate and give them a little card and say, this is Judson Baptist Church and Jesus loves you. 5 a.m. is not it anymore, is it? A few years ago, it was midnight. And then a few years, just a little more recent, it was 9 to 12 on Thanksgiving. You just get a certain group of bargains from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. And then all of a sudden, it became 5 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day. And this year I noticed, and maybe they have done it before, but this year I noticed for the first time that there were even some stores that were open all day Thanksgiving. We didn't even have time as a nation to spare one day to stop and give thanks to God. It was squeezed out by our greed for more possessions. And you know, they're only open because we come and shop there. Let's be honest. How much is enough? How much is enough? Amos might ask the people. We might ask some of our seniors. Many of you have downsized. How many of you have downsized at some time or other? What a job that is. What a transition. Bob was sharing with me this morning that he took some of his family possessions up to Iowa to give to his sister. There are all moments in our lives where we just downsize, and we realize, finally, we come to the realization we have more possessions than we use. I still have boxes in my basement. Jessica, at Christmas time, was looking for the punch bowl. And she went down. She was determined we were going to have a punch bowl for Christmas. And she was determined to find it. And she went down to go through the boxes of china that had not been unpacked. I hate to confess, I actually have 3 punch bowls. Anyway, she didn't find any of them. Thank you, Lord. I found it just last week. It's actually up in the kitchen, and it's tucked behind in this one little corner that we never opened. We have so many possessions. And such a chore it is to downsize. One of the saddest events I ever witnessed was a couple, 92 and 93, at the end of life, and they both died within 6 months of each other. And the only son, who was in his 70s, had an estate sale. This was a farm. And the auctioneers came in, and they put everything out on the flatbed hay wagons. And because they had so many antiques and so much silver and so many things, the ad had gone out all through Illinois to Chicago and different places. And when the sale opened, it was just swarmed with antique dealers. And it was so sad to watch this couple's possessions being sold off, auctioned off, one after another, boxes full of things for a few dollars. Someone said to me just this week, "What are we going to do with all our things? What are we going to do with all our things?" They had moved from a 8-10-room house to a 2-room apartment. Possessions. The shopkeepers of Amos's day were literally consumed with consumerism. Their greed was unbelievable. They were cheating their customers in about 3 different ways. One way was they were undersizing the basket. They were selling grain. The ephod, which was the measurement of that day, is about the size of our bushel basket. They had undersized that and were adding grain in a small basket and selling it for the same price. Does that sound familiar? Have you bought coffee lately? Or any other item? It comes out, cereal. Somebody mentioned in the last service, cereal. It comes out in a new, improved packaging, but really all they've done is downsize. Whether it's coffee or cereal or soap or whatever it is, it's the same as what the people in Amos's day were doing. The other thing they were doing is they were weighting the scale. In other words, the shekel, which was the main mode of weight, they were making it heavier than what it really should have been. It's kind of like the old cartoon where you see the butcher weighing the meat, and he's got his thumb sitting right there on the scale too. And the third thing was that they actually rigged the scales themselves, and they were not true. And then did you hear the part where the sweepings off the floor were even included in the grain? They were just downright dishonest. The point that Amos is trying to make is that your life, your Christianity, your worship should carry in all week long. It's not enough just to remember the Sabbath and the festivals and then cheat people all week long. We are to have a holistic life. How many of you have, now be honest, how many of you have a certain set of clothes that you wear on Sundays? Boy, we had that as a child especially. We had certain clothes that were only Sunday clothes. We had certain shoes that you could only wear on Sunday. On Communion Sunday in the church I grew up with, we would have 12 men come up and serve communion, and every one of them in a suit and tie. And not any of these flashy ties. Oh, no. They better be conservative, subdued ties. They better look like deacons. And yet some of those very deacons during the week were not so deaconish, if you know what I mean. We won't go into their lifestyles. But the point is, we are so guilty of dividing our lives into Sunday lives and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday lives. Like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we turn into very different people. You know, unfortunately, we don't use God's rules to judge our lives most of the time. Most of the time, if we're honest, we use our own rules. And I'm as guilty as the next person. I like to get up on Sunday mornings and I look out and I think, none of my neighbors are getting up and going to church. Why? I'm the only one in this neighborhood that goes to church. And I pat myself on the back. Why, I never miss church. I always remember the Sabbath. Well, of course, I get paid to be here. You know, let me tell you that preachers often wonder about how regular their church attendance would be if they weren't preachers. Don't ever let them tell you anything different. Well, then I think, well, I go to church, I tithe. That's another pat on the back. We all give money to the church, and well, we may complain occasionally because they are constantly asking us for more, hounding us for more soup. Another pat on the back. I brought my soup. Did you bring your soup? Pat yourself there on the back. I've helped the poor this month. Well, maybe my soup will be my help for the whole year, but I've helped them. I put money in the red kettles at Christmas time. Yeah? And yet I see other people walk right by, so wow. I'm another pat here on my back. Really, according to my standards, I'm a pretty good person. I can go to bed at night thinking, hey, I'm a pretty great person. Look at all the things I do. But unfortunately, it's not my plumb line. It's God's. God is looking at how true and faithful my life is. I'm not even to measure myself up against the preacher or the person beside me or anyone. I am to look at God's standards and God's rules. Do to others what you would like done to you. Think about what that would really mean in your life.